Nathan Rivers squinted at the gene sequencer readout, trying to decipher why the extremophile plant sample was producing proteins that shouldn't exist according to any known biochemistry. 3 months ago, this would have baffled him completely. Now, after 8 months working alongside Dr. Lysa and the Ilari research team, he'd learned to expect the impossible from organisms that somehow thrived in the radiation-soaked environment near binary stars, where nothing should survive at all. "You're making that face again," Lysa's voice came from behind him, carrying the slight harmonic overtone that characterized Ilari's speech. "The one that means you've found something fascinating but don't understand it yet." Nathan turned to find her standing in the lab doorway, and his heart did that little skip it had been doing increasingly often around her. The Ilari were striking in their alienness, tall and graceful with luminescent skin that shifted through subtle colors reflecting their emotional states, and most distinctively, elongated ears that swept upward and back in elegant curves that humans had quickly nicknamed elf ears, much to the Ilari's confusion about the Earth mythology reference. Lysa's ears tilted forward slightly, which Nathan had learned indicated focused attention or curiosity. Her skin patterns were settling into the soft blue-green that seemed to be her baseline when she was relaxed and engaged. She'd been his research partner for the entire 8 months he'd been aboard the Celestial Horizon station, and they developed an easy working relationship that had gradually evolved into something he carefully didn't examine too closely because humans and Ilari didn't do that right. Cross-species attraction was probably just exotic novelty, or at least that's what Nathan told himself every time he caught himself staring at the way light played across her luminescent skin, or the intelligence in her eyes when she worked through a complex problem. "I'm making the face because this protein structure makes absolutely no sense," Nathan said, gesturing at the display. "It's folding in ways that should be thermodynamically impossible, but here it is, existing anyway and apparently functional. The universe continues to not care about what I think should be possible." Lysa moved to stand beside him, close enough that he caught the faint scent of her, something like ozone and growing things, alien but not unpleasant. She studied the readout with that characteristic Ilari intensity, her ears moving through several positions as she processed the data faster than Nathan could track. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The radiation environment is providing energy for configurations that would be unstable under normal stellar conditions. The plant has essentially created a biochemistry that requires constant radiation exposure to maintain protein stability. Remove it from this environment, and these structures would collapse immediately. Which explains why every sample we've tried to transport to standard labs has died within hours." Nathan pulled up additional data. "But look at this. The energy requirements for maintaining these configurations should still exceed what's available even with the radiation input. There's something else going on, some energy source or process we're not detecting." They fell into their usual research rhythm, Nathan spotting patterns and asking questions, Lysa applying rigorous analysis and theoretical frameworks, both of them building on each other's insights in ways that produced better results than either could achieve alone. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes, the kind of deep focus that Nathan loved about scientific work, made better by having a partner who made him think harder and better. The station's chronometer finally pulled them out of their analytical trance, signaling the end of their official shift. Nathan stretched, feeling muscles protest from standing too long, and realized he was starving. "Food," he suggested. "I think the galley was making something that's supposedly compatible with both human and Ilari biochemistry tonight. Should be either delicious or horrifying." Lysa's skin patterns shifted to colors that suggested amusement. "Your species' approach to cuisine continues to baffle me. You seem to view eating as entertainment rather than simply nutritional intake." "That's because humans are smart enough to realize that if you have to eat anyway, you might as well enjoy it. Food is one of life's pleasures, not just fuel." This is perhaps why humans have such complicated relationships with their own biology. Everything must be pleasure optimized rather than efficiency optimized. And that's why Ilari miss out on so much joy. Sometimes inefficiency is the point. They bantered like this often, gentle teasing about their species' different approaches to basically everything. And Nathan had come to treasure these moments as much as the intense research collaborations. Lysa had a dry wit that surprised humans who expected Ilari to be humorless logic machines, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy their cultural exchanges even when she found human behavior baffling. The galley was crowded with the evening shift change, humans and Ilari mingling more comfortably than they had when Nathan first arrived. The Celestial Horizon was designed as a collaborative research station, part of the ongoing Human-Ilari alliance that was still relatively new and sometimes awkward. But 8 months of shared work and living space had created genuine friendships across the species barrier. Nathan grabbed food that looked vaguely familiar and joined a mixed group at one of the large tables. Lysa settled beside him with her own meal, something that looked like it had been engineered to meet Ilari nutritional requirements while not being completely unpalatable to human aesthetic standards. The conversation was light, people decompressing after long shifts, and eventually drifted to cultural differences in partnership and family structures. I still can't get over how complicated human dating is, one of the engineers, Marcus, was saying. You meet someone, then there's this whole multi-stage process of figuring out if you're compatible, and meanwhile everyone's playing these games about who's interested and who's not, and half the time you don't figure out if it's actually going to work until you've invested months or years. It's exhausting just hearing about it. That's because you're comparing it to Ilari partnership arrangements. Another human, Dr. Patel, responded, which are extremely efficient but, no offense to our Ilari friends, kind of romance-free from a human perspective. You observe someone for a while, determine compatibility, propose a logical partnership arrangement. Done. Where's the passion, the uncertainty, the excitement? One of the Ilari researchers, Kira, made a gesture with her ears that indicated polite disagreement. Romance and passion are human concepts that Ilari find inefficient and potentially destabilizing. We prefer to establish partnership based on verified compatibility across multiple dimensions: intellectual, temperamental, life goal alignment. The observational period is quite thorough. By the time we propose partnership, we're certain of success. But don't you miss the excitement, the not knowing, Marcus pressed, the whole experience of falling in love. We don't fall. We deliberately choose. This seems more reliable than depending on neurochemical reactions that humans admit often lead to poor long-term outcomes. The conversation continued in this vein, good-natured but highlighting the very real differences in how the two species approached relationships. Nathan found himself only half listening, his attention drifting to Lysa beside him. He'd never really thought about what a Lari partnership looked like in practice. He'd assumed, in the vague way he assumed things about alien cultures, that Ilari didn't have anything equivalent to human romantic relationships, that they were too logical and reserved for that kind of thing. But listening to Kira describe the lengthy observational period, the careful analysis of compatibility, the eventual proposal when certainty was achieved, Nathan found himself wondering if that was really so different from what humans did, just more honest and direct about it. Humans observed potential partners too, analyzed compatibility, just did it through the chaotic process of dating rather than through calm assessment. Maybe Ilari just skipped the inefficient parts and got to the point. Marcus was still going on about the romance of uncertainty when Nathan, slightly buzzed from the synthetic wine that affected human and Ilari biochemistry similarly enough to be shared, made an offhand comment that would change his life. Honestly, if Lysa proposed to me, I'd probably say yes. She's brilliant, patient enough to tolerate my chaos, and we work together better than any research partner I've ever had. Seems like solid compatibility metrics to me. He'd meant it as a joke, as appreciation for their working relationship framed in the context of the conversation about Elari partnership logic. The other humans laughed, getting the humor of applying Elari logical analysis to his and Lysa's clearly strong professional partnership. But the Elari at the table went very still in that characteristic way they had when processing something significant, and Lysa's luminescent patterns shifted rapidly through colors Nathan had learned indicated surprise, intense thought, and something he couldn't quite identify, maybe hope. Before Nathan could clarify that he was joking, before he could explain that he didn't mean it as an actual proposal invitation, Lysa stood with that fluid Elari grace and moved to stand directly in front of him. The entire galley had gone quiet, conversations dying as people realized something unusual was happening. Lysa looked down at him. She was tall enough that even when he was sitting and she was standing, her height advantage was notable, and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear clearly, though in the sudden silence her words carried. Then say yes. Nathan's brain stuttered to a complete halt. What? You said you would say yes if I proposed. I am proposing, say yes. Her expression was serious, her voice carrying none of the humor or playfulness Nathan desperately wanted to hear. The galley had gone from quiet to absolutely silent, every human and Elari watching this interaction with focused attention. Lysa, I was joking. That wasn't an actual. I mean, humans make comments like that, it doesn't mean. I know you were joking. I am not. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the table, a gesture that was profoundly intimate by Elari standards. Nathan's heart was suddenly racing hard enough that he wondered if his medical monitoring implant was about to alert the station physician to a cardiac event. Nathan Rivers, Lysa continued, her voice still quiet but absolutely steady. My people have been observing your behavior for 8 months. We do not approach partnerships casually. When we choose someone, it is after extensive consideration and certainty about compatibility. I have chosen you. My family has approved this choice. The Elari Council supports this union as beneficial for human-Elari relations. All that remains is your consent. Nathan felt like the station's artificial gravity had just failed and he was floating untethered. You're serious. This is an actual marriage proposal. Yes. Though I understand humans prefer more elaborate romantic context, I can provide that if necessary, but the fundamental question remains, will you bond with me? His mouth opened and closed several times while his brain tried desperately to process what was happening. Lysa, brilliant, logical, beautiful Lysa, was standing in front of him in a crowded galley, holding his hand, asking him to marry her or bond, or whatever the Elari equivalent was. And apparently this wasn't a sudden impulse, but the result of 8 months of observation and analysis that he'd been completely oblivious to while thinking his growing feelings for her were inappropriate and one-sided, and something he should suppress. Nathan started, then stopped, having no idea what words should follow. His mind was simultaneously screaming several contradictory things. That this was insane, that they barely knew each other, that cross-species marriage was complicated and difficult, that he wasn't worthy of someone like her, that he'd obviously misunderstood something fundamental about Elari culture. And underneath all of that, a small hopeful voice saying that maybe he wanted this, maybe he wanted her, maybe this was the best and most terrifying opportunity he'd ever been offered. Can we? Nathan swallowed hard. Can we maybe talk about this somewhere private? This is a lot to process, and I need to understand what you're actually proposing before I can answer. Lysa's patterns shifted to colors suggesting understanding and patience. Of course, I did not mean to make you uncomfortable with public declaration. I thought. She paused, her ears tilting in a way that might have been uncertainty. I thought based on your comment that you were open to this possibility. But I recognize now that human humor does not always indicate actual intent. We can discuss privately. She released his hand and stepped back, and Nathan immediately felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. He stood, his legs shaky, and followed her out of the suddenly buzzing galley where everyone was undoubtedly going to spend the rest of the evening dissecting what just happened. They walked in silence through the station's corridors until reaching one of the observation lounges, smaller rooms with reinforced windows looking out at the binary stars that created spectacular light shows as they orbited each other. The lounge was empty at this hour, most people at dinner or starting their evening routines. Lysa stood at the window, her back to Nathan, her luminescent pattern cycling through colors he'd never seen from her. Uncertainty, maybe vulnerability, possibly fear that she'd miscalculated badly. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was carefully neutral in that way Elari had when they were working hard to suppress emotion. "I apologize if I misread the situation," she said formally. "Your comment suggested openness to partnership, but I now understand it was human humor that did not reflect actual intent. Please know that I would not have proposed if I believed you were opposed to the concept. My observational analysis indicated significant probability of positive response based on your behavioral patterns over the past months, but I may have interpreted cross-species signals incorrectly." Nathan held up a hand to stop her. "Lysa, wait, just give me a second to catch up, okay? You just proposed marriage in front of like 30 people after I made a joke. My brain is still rebooting. Can you explain what you mean by observing me for 8 months? Because from my perspective, we've been research partners and friends, and I had no idea you were thinking about this kind of partnership." Lysa's ears tilted through several positions before settling into something that looked like determination mixed with continued uncertainty. In Elari culture, the observation period is the courtship. We do not engage in the multi-stage romantic escalation that humans practice. Instead, we observe potential partners carefully over time, analyzing compatibility across multiple dimensions. When an Elari determines someone is optimal partnership material based on thorough assessment, we propose directly. The lengthy observation is how we show interest and build certainty. The proposal is simply formalization of conclusions already reached. She moved away from the window, her movements carrying an agitation Nathan had never seen from her before. "I have been evaluating you as potential partner for approximately 6 months. Everything about our interaction, the way we complement each other intellectually, the respect we show each other's perspectives, the genuine friendship that has developed, the physical attraction you have displayed through biometric indicators, suggests extremely high compatibility. Initially, partnership with a human had not occurred to me as possibility, but observing your character, your kindness, your emotional honesty, the way you treat Elari colleagues with genuine respect rather than as exotic specimens to be studied, I found myself drawn to you in ways that surprised me." Nathan's heart was doing complicated things in his chest. "You're saying you've been, what, courting me for 6 months, and I completely missed it. Elari courtship is not obvious to humans because we express interest differently. I thought," she paused, her patterns shifting to colors suggesting embarrassment. "I thought my interest was evident. I prioritized our collaboration schedules, ensured our breaks aligned, introduced topics I knew interested you, defended your research methodology to skeptical superiors, observed your preferences and accommodated them. These are clear courtship behaviors for Elari. But for humans, those just look like being a really good colleague and friend," Nathan said, his mind reeling with the realization that he'd been completely oblivious to 6 months of alien courtship while developing feelings he thought were one-sided and inappropriate. "We don't recognize those as romantic signals unless they're paired with human romance indicators. Flirting, physical escalation, explicit statements of romantic interest. I understand that now. I should have researched human courtship practices more thoroughly before assuming my intentions were clear." Lysa's patterns had settled into colors suggesting resignation and disappointment. I have made you uncomfortable and possibly damaged our working relationship. I apologize. We can proceed as before if you prefer, though I admit maintaining purely professional distance will be difficult now. Nathan took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough to see the subtle shifts in her luminescent patterns that he'd been watching for months without understanding their significance. Lysa, stop. You haven't damaged anything. You've just surprised me completely. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love me? In whatever way Elari experienced love. Lysa was very still, her ears tilting forward in that focused attention position. Elari do not use the word love precisely as humans do. It is too imprecise in human usage, carrying too many contradictory meanings. But I value you profoundly. I want your happiness and well-being. I enjoy your company more than anyone else's. I find you intellectually stimulating and physically appealing. I can envision building a life together that would be satisfying for both of us. I think about you when you are not present. I miss you when we are separated for extended periods. If that constellation of feelings constitutes what humans call love, then yes, I love you, Nathan Rivers. Nathan felt tears stinging his eyes, which was embarrassing but apparently unavoidable when the woman, the person you'd been half in love with for months, just told you she felt the same way, just in a different language you hadn't known how to hear. I need time to process this. Not because I don't want, not because you're wrong about compatibility, but this is huge. This is marriage. To someone from a different species with different cultural expectations and ways of being. I need to think about what that actually means before I can answer responsibly. I understand. Elari make decisions efficiently once sufficient data is gathered, but I recognize humans process major life choices differently. Take whatever time you need. Lysa's patterns were shifting toward colors that suggested sadness but acceptance. But Nathan, I ask one thing. Be honest with yourself about what you want, not what you think you should want based on species loyalty or cultural expectation. I chose you for you, not because you are human or because it serves political purposes. I would want your answer to come from the same place. She moved toward the door, then paused. Also, you should know. My proposal is not purely personal, though my reasons for choosing you are. The Elari government views successful human-Elari bonding, particularly between respected scientists from both species, as politically and culturally valuable. It would demonstrate that the species barrier is not absolute, that deep partnership across species is possible, and it would strengthen the alliance between our civilizations. There is no pressure from my government. I chose you based on my own assessment, but you should understand that our decision has implications beyond ourselves. Then convinced himself one answer was right. His brain immediately produced 17 arguments for why that answer was actually wrong. He avoided Lysa, which was cowardly but necessary for processing space, and spent his time talking to other humans on the station who had close working relationships with Elari. He learned things about Elari partnerships that he should have researched 6 months ago if he'd had any idea courtship was happening. That Elari bonds were profoundly stable because their logical approach meant they didn't bond impulsively and almost never separated once bonded. That Elari partners were intensely loyal, supportive, and committed to mutual growth, viewing partnership as a collaboration to optimize both individuals' well-being and achievement. That the emotional expression differences that seemed cold to humans initially actually masked deep feeling that Elari simply expressed differently, through actions and long-term consistency rather than dramatic displays. He also learned that there were several other human-Elari partnerships that had formed over the past few years as the alliance deepened, though they were still rare enough to be noteworthy. The people in those partnerships described challenges, communication difficulties, cultural misunderstandings, dealing with judgment from both species, but also described something profound and beautiful in bridging that distance, in building connection across differences that seemed insurmountable at first. Nathan also confronted his own fears in the privacy of his quarters at 3 a.m. when sleep refused to come. He was terrified of not being good enough for someone as brilliant as Lysa, terrified that his human emotional volatility would exhaust or frustrate her, terrified that cross-species marriage would be so complicated that it would fail despite their best efforts, terrified that he'd be isolated from human culture and community, terrified that if they had children, and apparently Elari biotechnology could make hybrid children possible, those children would struggle with identity and belonging. But underneath all the fear was a growing certainty that felt like coming home. He wanted this. He wanted Lysa. He wanted to wake up beside her and spend evenings talking about research and life and everything else. He wanted to figure out how to bridge their differences through patience and communication and genuine effort. He wanted to build something new that neither humans nor Elari had built before, something that was theirs specifically rather than conforming perfectly to either species' template. The realization didn't make the fear go away, but it put the fear in perspective. Of course he was scared. Anyone making a decision this big should be scared. But being scared wasn't a reason to say no if the thing he was scared of was also what he wanted. On the third day, Nathan sent a message to Lysa requesting they meet in the same observation lounge where they'd had their first conversation after her proposal. She arrived within minutes, her luminescent patterns carefully neutral in ways that Nathan now understood meant she was working very hard to suppress anxiety. Her ears were positioned in what he'd learned indicated focused attention mixed with uncertainty, and he felt a surge of affection seeing her trying to project calm, while clearly being as nervous as he was. "Thank you for meeting me," Nathan said, gesturing to the seating area near the window where the binary stars continued their eternal dance. "I've been thinking about your proposal, constantly, for 3 days straight. I don't think I've actually slept more than a few hours total, because my brain won't shut up about all the implications and possibilities and fears." Lysa settled into a seat across from him, maintaining respectful distance. "I did not mean to cause you distress. I recognize now that my directness was not calibrated well for human emotional processing." "No, your directness was fine. Honestly, it was probably the only way this could have happened, because I was never going to make the first move. I spent 6 months thinking my feelings for you were inappropriate and one-sided." Nathan took a breath, trying to organize the chaos of his thoughts into something coherent. "I've been trying to figure out the smart answer, the logical answer, the answer that makes sense, and I kept coming back to the same questions. What do I actually want? Not what's expected, not what's easiest, not what's safest. What do I want?" Lysa's patterns shifted slightly, colors suggesting she was listening with her entire being. "The answer is you," Nathan continued, feeling his voice shake slightly with emotion. "I want you. I want what you're offering: partnership, building a life together, figuring out how to make this work despite all the complicated differences. I want to wake up next to you and spend evenings talking about research and everything else that matters. I want to meet your family and introduce you to mine. I want to see where this goes, and I want to do it with you." He paused, needing her to understand the complete truth. "But I'm also terrified, Lysa. Terrified I'm not worthy of someone as brilliant as you. Terrified that I'll disappoint you with my human emotional volatility and need for reassurance, and all the ways I'm not logical and efficient. Terrified this will be too complicated and will fail despite our best efforts. I need to know, can you be patient with my human emotional needs? Can you accept that I'll sometimes need verbal reassurance, physical affection, expressions of care that might seem redundant to Elari logic? Can you handle that I don't process feelings through pure logic, that sometimes I'll be irrational or emotionally overwhelming?" Lysa stood and moved to sit beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched. "Nathan, I am aware of human emotional architecture. It was part of my compatibility analysis. Yes, it will require adjustment and patience on my part, but in 8 months of observation, I have never found your emotional expression off-putting. Only different and often insightful in ways pure logic misses. I cannot promise to always understand immediately. Our cognitive processing is different. But I promise to always try, to communicate honestly when I'm confused, and to value your feelings even when they don't follow patterns I find logical. Her luminescent patterns were shifting through colors Nathan associated with vulnerability and honesty. I should also admit something. I am terrified as well. Terrified that my Elari approach will seem cold to you, that I will not be able to provide the romantic passion humans seem to need, that you will eventually regret choosing someone so different from human partners you could have had. My people do not doubt ourselves often. We make decisions only after achieving certainty. But this matters enough that doubt has crept in despite my analysis indicating high compatibility. Hearing Lysa admit fear and doubt made something click into place in Nathan's chest. She wasn't a perfectly logical alien evaluating him as an optimal genetic match. She was a person who cared about him deeply enough to be scared that this might not work, but willing to try anyway because she believed in their compatibility enough to take the risk. That wasn't cold logic. That was courage. That was exactly what he needed to make his decision feel right. Nathan reached out and took her hand, a gesture that was significant and intimate in both their cultures. Then, let's be scared together. Let's figure this out as we go. Yes, Lysa. My answer is yes. I want to bond with you, build a life together, deal with whatever complications come because we'll be dealing with them together. Lysa's luminescent patterns flared in colors Nathan had learned indicated joy and profound relief, brighter than he'd ever seen them. For a moment, she seemed to struggle with what to do, like her Elari reserve was fighting with something else. And then suddenly she was pulling him into an embrace that was careful at first, tentative, then tighter as she realized he was hugging her back just as fiercely. I was afraid you would decline, she said against his shoulder, her voice carrying emotion that Elari usually suppressed completely. That the cultural distance would be too great, or that you would not want what I could offer, or that my logical approach to partnership would seem cold compared to human romantic passion. What you're offering is exactly what I want, Nathan said, holding her close and feeling the warmth of her skin, the subtle luminescence visible even with his eyes closed. I love you, Lysa. I don't care if that's imprecise human terminology, it's what I feel. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and I'm saying yes. I love you as well, Nathan, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion Nathan could feel in the tension of her body. In whatever terminology captures the depth of my regard and commitment to your well-being and happiness. I chose you deliberately, after extensive observation and analysis. I continue to choose you now that you have chosen me in return. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while binary starlight painted patterns on the walls. Two beings from different worlds who just decided to build something together despite the distance between them, despite all the logical reasons why it might not work. Because sometimes the heart, human or Elari, knows things that logic can't explain. Eventually, they pulled apart enough to look at each other, and Nathan found himself laughing slightly, giddy with relief and joy and residual terror about what they'd just agreed to. So, what happens now? Do we need to fill out forms, have meetings with both our governments, figure out where we're going to live and how this bonding thing actually works? Yes to all of those things, Lysa said, her patterns settling into colors that suggested contentment and amusement. But first, I should explain what bonding means in Elari culture, and we should discuss how to integrate human marriage traditions so that both our families and communities feel honored. This will require planning and diplomacy. Can we do the planning tomorrow? Right now, I just want to stay here with you and process the fact that this is real, that you actually chose me and I actually chose you back, and that we're going to figure out how to make this work. That is acceptable, optimal even. Lysa shifted so they were sitting side by side, her hands still in his, both of them looking out at the binary stars. Nathan, I want you to know. I do not expect you to become Elari, just as I will not attempt to become human. We will build something new, something that honors both our species' approaches while being specifically ours. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I want too. Nathan squeezed her hand. Partners. In research in life, in figuring out how to bridge the distance between two species through sheer stubborn determination and a lot of communication. Partners, Lysa agreed, and the word carried weight and promise that made Nathan's chest feel too full to contain everything he was feeling. They sat together in comfortable silence, occasionally talking about practical matters but mostly just being present with each other, until exhaustion finally caught up with Nathan, and he dozed off with his head on Lysa's shoulder. She stayed still, not wanting to disturb him, her luminescent patterns cycling through colors of contentment and joy and anticipation for a future that had become suddenly, impossibly real. When station morning cycle began and Nathan woke with a stiff neck and Lysa's arm around him, his first thought was that maybe he dreamed the whole thing. But Lysa's patterns brightened as he stirred, and she said quietly, "Good morning, partner. We should probably return to our quarters and make ourselves presentable before announcing our bonding to the station administration and our families. This will create significant attention." Nathan groaned, "Right. Politics and paperwork, the romantic aftermath of every good decision. Romance is inefficient. We can be romantic later. First, logistics. I love that you think those things can be separated. I love that you think they cannot. We will compromise." And somehow, that exchange, practical and affectionate and so perfectly them, made Nathan more certain than ever that saying yes had been the right choice, that they could build something real across the distance between them, that love, however it was expressed or defined, could bridge gaps that seemed unbridgeable when you found the right person to bridge them with. The announcement of their bonding decision created waves across both human and Elari communities that Nathan should have anticipated, but somehow hadn't fully prepared for. Within hours of officially informing station administration and sending messages to their respective families, reactions started flooding in from every direction, some supportive, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Several human crew members congratulated Nathan enthusiastically, excited about the first human Elari bonding aboard the Celestial Horizon, and viewing it as a positive sign that the human Elari alliance was deepening beyond just political and economic cooperation into genuine cultural integration. Others were more reserved, questioning whether Nathan had fully considered the implications of marrying an alien, whether the cultural differences would be too difficult to navigate, whether he was compromising his human identity for the sake of exotic novelty. The Elari reactions were similarly mixed. Many of Lysa's colleagues expressed approval in the formal Elari way, careful acknowledgement that her compatibility analysis had clearly been thorough and her choice logical. But there were also Elari who viewed the union as inappropriate, arguing that bonding outside their species compromised genetic and cultural purity, that Lysa was lowering herself by choosing a human partner when suitable Elari matches existed. The worst reactions came through anonymous messages on the station's internal network, humans accusing Nathan of betraying his species, Elari accusing Lysa of biological contamination, both sides questioning whether their union was genuine or just political theater designed to strengthen the human-Elari alliance. The vitriol was shocking and hurtful, and Nathan found himself doubting his decision during the first few days as the criticism piled up. Lysa handled the negativity with characteristic Elari logic, pointing out that approximately 73% of reactions were positive or neutral, which was actually higher approval than expected for such unprecedented action. The remaining 27% of negative responses were statistically inevitable given that significant cultural change always faced resistance from conservative elements in any society. Her calm analysis helped, but Nathan still struggled with feeling judged and questioned by both his own species and hers. What helped more was the support they received from unexpected sources. Nathan's family, initially uncertain about their son bonding with an alien, arrived from Earth for preliminary meetings and were won over by Lysa's obvious intelligence, her patient efforts to understand human family dynamics and customs, and most importantly, the way she clearly cared deeply about Nathan's happiness. His mother pulled him aside after meeting Lysa and said, "I admit I was skeptical and worried, but I've watched how you two interact, and I've never seen you this happy or this certain about anything. That matters more than species difference." Lysa's family, following Elari formal protocols, traveled from their homeworld for traditional pre-bonding evaluation. They interviewed Nathan extensively, assessing his character, his understanding of Elari partnership expectations, his genuine commitment to Lysa's well-being. Nathan had been terrified of this assessment, worried that they would find him inadequate or inappropriate for their daughter. But after 3 days of intensive interaction, Lysa's parents formally declared their approval, with her father stating that Nathan had demonstrated sufficient intelligence, emotional stability, and commitment to partnership success. More personally, Lysa's mother told Nathan that his emotional expressiveness, initially viewed as potential weakness by Elari standards, actually created a warmth in his relationship with Lysa that traditional Elari partnerships sometimes lacked, and that perhaps Elari culture could learn something valuable from human emotional openness. Planning the bonding ceremony became an exercise in cultural diplomacy. Human weddings and Elari bonding rituals had very different structures and meanings, and merging them required extensive research and compromise. Human weddings emphasized public declaration of commitment, emotional expression, celebration with community. Elari bondings were more private, focused on formal acknowledgement of partnership compatibility, logical exchange of commitments, integration into family networks. They decided to create a hybrid ceremony that honored both traditions, public enough to satisfy human needs for communal celebration, formal enough to meet Elari requirements for proper ritual acknowledgement. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 months after Nathan's acceptance, giving both families time to travel and preparations to be completed. During those 2 months, Nathan and Lysa navigated the complex process of actually being engaged, a period that tested their relationship in ways that made Nathan grateful they'd built strong friendship first. They had their first serious arguments during planning discussions, usually stemming from different communication styles or cultural assumptions. Nathan wanted more emotional reassurance than Lysa naturally provided, leading to discussions about how to express affection in ways that met both their needs. Lysa expected more practical planning and less emotional processing than Nathan's human wiring required, leading to compromises about balancing efficiency with emotional connection. But they worked through each challenge by remembering that they'd chosen each other deliberately, that differences didn't have to be divisive, that learning to communicate across cultural gaps was part of building their specific partnership, rather than trying to force their relationship into either human or Elari templates. They established practices that became rituals for them. Nathan learned to read Lysa's subtle emotional cues, rather than expecting verbal declarations constantly, while Lysa learned to provide physical affection and words of affirmation that human emotional architecture needed even when they felt redundant to her logical processing. The bonding ceremony itself took place in the station's largest observation dome, with the binary stars providing spectacular natural lighting that required no additional decoration. Over 200 people attended, humans and Elari, family members and colleagues, diplomatic representatives from both governments. Nathan wore formal human wedding attire, while Lysa wore traditional Elari bonding robes that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated she was entering a bonded state. The ceremony was officiated jointly by a human diplomat who specialized in cross-cultural events, and an Elari elder who had performed bonding rituals for decades. They spoke in turn about the significance of this union, not just for Nathan and Lysa personally, but for both species, as demonstration that the distance between humans and Elari could be bridged through genuine connection and mutual commitment. Nathan's vows incorporated both human emotional expression and Elari logical commitment. Lysa, I choose you deliberately and completely. I promise to support your growth and happiness, to communicate honestly even when it's difficult, to respect our differences while building common ground, to be your partner in research and in life, to face challenges together rather than separately. I promise to be patient with your Elari logic when my human emotions are overwhelming me, and to trust that your actions express care, even when your words seem insufficient to my human needs. I love you with everything I am, and I commit to building a life with you that honors both who we are and who we're becoming together. Lysa's vows reflected her Elari approach, while acknowledging what she'd learned about human emotional needs. Nathan Rivers, I have chosen you after extensive observation and analysis, and that choice becomes more certain with each day we spend together. I commit to partnership that prioritizes your well-being and happiness alongside my own. I commit to learning the emotional expressiveness your human architecture requires, even when it seems inefficient to my Elari logic. I commit to building a life together that integrates our different approaches to relationships, creating something new that belongs specifically to us. You have taught me that logic and emotion are not opposed but complementary, that efficiency is not always optimal when connection is the goal. I love you in the Elari way and increasingly in the human way as well. The ceremony concluded with both human and Elari blessing rituals, and when Nathan and Lysa were finally declared bonded by both their culture's standards, the observation dome erupted in cheers and harmonized Elari approval tones that blended into something beautiful and unprecedented. Two species celebrating a union that shouldn't have been possible according to the assumptions both held about the unbridgeable distances between them. At the reception that followed, Nathan found himself in conversation with his sister Sarah, who had been openly skeptical about the engagement when first announced, but had gradually come around as she watched Nathan and Lysa navigate the planning process together. I owe you an apology, Sarah said, pulling Nathan aside. When you first told me you were marrying an alien, I thought you'd lost your mind. But I've watched you two together these past months, and I've never seen you this happy or this settled. The way you look at her, the way she anticipates what you need before you ask, the obvious care you show each other despite all the cultural differences, it's real. That's what matters. It is real, Nathan agreed, watching Lysa across the room where she was speaking with his parents, her luminescent patterns shifting through colors that indicated contentment and engagement. It's also complicated and sometimes frustrating and requires constant communication and compromise. But it's worth it. She's worth it. What we're building together is worth the effort. Are you scared? Sarah asked. About the future, about whether this can work long-term. Terrified, Nathan admitted. Scared that we'll face challenges we can't overcome, that our kids, if we have kids, will struggle with hybrid identity and not belonging fully to either species, that will eventually hurt each other despite our best intentions. But I'm more excited than scared, because I get to build this future with someone remarkable who chose me deliberately and completely. That's worth the risk. Lysa had a similar conversation with her parents, who expressed satisfaction that she'd chosen a partner who clearly valued her and treated her with appropriate respect and care. Her father noted that Nathan's emotional expressiveness, initially concerning to Elari standards, actually created a warmth and openness in their relationship that traditional Elari partnerships often lacked. Her mother observed that perhaps Elari culture's emphasis on pure logic and efficiency in partnerships had caused them to overlook the value of emotional connection and vulnerability, and that human-Elari unions could teach both species something important about balancing different approaches to relationship. The first months of bonded life brought both joy and significant adjustment. Nathan and Lysa chose to remain on the celestial horizon, continuing their research collaboration while navigating what it meant to be partners in all aspects of life rather than just work. They learned each other's routines and preferences, compromised on living space organization, Nathan's creative chaos versus Lysa's logical efficiency, and established new rituals that belonged specifically to them rather than conforming to either human or Elari relationship templates. They fought sometimes, Nathan's emotional volatility occasionally clashing with Lysa's logical approach, or Lysa's Elari reserve feeling cold when Nathan needed reassurance. But they always worked through conflicts by returning to the foundation they'd built: mutual respect, genuine care for each other's well-being, and commitment to communication even when it was difficult. They learned that fighting wasn't failure, but rather part of the process of two different people building shared life, that working through disagreements actually strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. Their research thrived with the deeper trust and intimacy that bonding created. They published groundbreaking papers on extremophile botany, their collaborative work becoming a case study in successful human-Elari scientific partnership. Other mixed-species research teams began forming, inspired by their example, and the celestial horizon became known as a place where cross-species collaboration wasn't just tolerated but actively celebrated. A year after their bonding, Nathan and Lysa made the decision to have a child. The process required working with Elari biotechnologists, since natural conception between humans and Elari wasn't possible due to significant genetic incompatibility. The genetic engineering necessary to create a viable hybrid was complex, requiring careful integration of human and Elari genetic material, while ensuring the resulting child would be healthy and functional. The pregnancy was complicated, requiring constant monitoring and occasional medical interventions to support proper development. But the result was a healthy daughter they named Kira, who had primarily human features but with the distinctive Elari elongated ears and subtle luminescent patterns in her skin that shifted with her emotions. She was a beautiful fusion of both species, and watching her grow was like witnessing a living bridge between two worlds that had seemed impossibly distant. Kira's development was fascinating. She had human emotional expressiveness combined with Elari cognitive processing speed, human social needs alongside Elari logical analysis capabilities. She was fluent in both human and Elari communication styles almost from birth, able to read her parents' emotional and logical cues with equal facility. She represented something new and precious, not quite human, not quite Elari, but wholly herself. 2 years later, they had a son, Theo, with a similar blend of human and Elari characteristics. Raising hybrid children came with unique challenges, navigating questions about identity and belonging from both species, teaching them to value both their human and Elari heritage equally, helping them develop confidence in being something new rather than feeling they didn't fit anywhere. But Nathan and Lysa approached parenting the same way they'd approached their relationship, with communication, compromise, respect for differences, and the foundational belief that love expressed across species and cultural boundaries could create something beautiful and strong. 5 years after Nathan's casual joke became a serious proposal, the family stood together in the same observation lounge where Nathan had accepted Lysa's proposal. The binary stars continued their eternal dance outside, and their children, comfortable in both human and Elari cultural contexts, asked questions about the stars, about why humans and Elari were different, about whether they were human or Elari or something else entirely. Nathan and Lysa exchanged glances, that wordless communication they developed that mixed human intuition with Elari efficiency, and answered together. They were both. They were neither, they were themselves, living proof that differences didn't prevent connection, That courage to say yes to the unexpected could create something beautiful. That love, however it was defined or expressed, could bridge distances that seemed unbridgeable. Tell us again how you and Mother bonded, Kira requested, having heard the story dozens of times but never tiring of it. Nathan smiled, pulling his daughter close while Theo climbed into Lisa's lap. Well, it started with me making a joke I didn't think anyone would take seriously. I said if your mother proposed to me, I'd say yes. I meant it as a compliment about how well we worked together. But Mother took it seriously, Theo interjected, knowing the story by heart. Very seriously, Lisa confirmed, her luminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated warm amusement. Because I had been observing your father for months, analyzing compatibility, and his comment indicated openness to partnership I had been hoping to find. So you proposed right there in front of everyone, Kira said with satisfaction. And father was so surprised he didn't know what to say. I was completely shocked, Nathan admitted. I had no idea your mother had been thinking of me that way, but then she said something that changed my life. Then say yes. And you did say yes, both children chorused together. Eventually, Nathan laughed. After 3 days of panicking and overthinking and trying to figure out if I was brave enough to build a life with someone from a completely different species. But yes, I said yes, because I loved your mother and trusted that we could make it work. And did it work? Theo asked, even though he knew the answer. It's working, Lisa said, her logical precision as always slightly different from Nathan's emotional framing. We face challenges regularly. Communication across our cultural differences requires constant effort, but we chose each other deliberately, and we continue choosing each other every day. That is what makes partnership successful, not absence of difficulty, but commitment to working through difficulty together. More simply, Nathan added with a grin at Lisa's characteristic Ilari explanation. Yes, it worked. It's working. It will keep working because we love each other and we're both stubborn enough not to give up when things get hard. Plus, we got you two out of the deal and your pretty great outcomes. The children beamed at this, and the family settled into comfortable silence, watching the binary stars and existing together in the peaceful certainty that they belonged to each other, that the distance between species could be bridged through love and commitment, and the willingness to build something new rather than trying to force their family into either human or Ilari templates that didn't quite fit. Nathan reflected on how a casual joke 5 years ago became the foundation for the most important and wonderful decision of his life. How terrifying and exhilarating it had been to say yes to something completely unexpected. How grateful he was that Lisa had the courage to whisper, then say yes, and give him permission to want what he didn't know he could have. Lisa, reading his emotional state through the biometric cues she'd learned to interpret over years together, tightened her arm around their family and said quietly, I am satisfied with my choice. My compatibility analysis was correct. You are optimal partner. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, Nathan teased, knowing she'd recognize his humor. I can be more romantic if you require it. Lisa responded with perfect seriousness that made Nathan love her even more. No need. Optimal partner works perfectly for me. And it did, because somewhere in the space between human